This war was over before it even began. The declaration came at dawn, though time held little meaning in deep space. The Galactic Dominion had spoken. Earth was to surrender and become a vassal state. Resistance was futile. Humanity would be allowed to exist, but only under the rule of their new alien overlords. The terms were non-negotiable. The message was transmitted across all human frequencies. It was clinical, devoid of emotion, as if Earth had already been conquered. They did not expect a response. But they got one. The reply came not from a council of frightened diplomats or a desperate plea for negotiations. Instead, it came from a single man. General Adrian Mercer, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. His message contained no threats. No attempts to reason. No negotiations. Just 4 words. We're declaring war. The Dominion's High Command found it amusing at first. A declaration of war from a species barely capable of interstellar travel? Absurd. Their analysts assured them that humanity, despite its resilience, was tactically and technologically inferior. The war, if it could even be called that, would be over in hours. That assumption was their first mistake. The war room on Earth was eerily calm. No frantic shouting, no desperate scrambling for solutions. Just a silent, methodical execution of pre-planned operations. General Mercer stood at the center of it all, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The Dominion fleet was already mobilizing. A force of 50,000 warships, each more advanced than anything humanity had fielded before. It was an overwhelming show of force. A warning to others who might dare to resist. "They expect us to panic," said Admiral Vasquez, arms crossed. "They expect a doomed last stand." "They expect wrong," Mercer replied. His officers exchanged knowing glances. The plan was already in motion. It had been for years. The Dominion had assumed Earth was behind technologically, and in many ways, they were right. But what they had never accounted for was humanity's most dangerous trait: adaptability. For decades, humanity had studied the Dominion. Learned from them. Stolen from them. Their overconfidence had made them careless, leaving breadcrumbs of knowledge in every engagement, every intercepted transmission. The moment Dominion ships had entered the Sol system, they had already lost. Mercer turned to his operations officer. "Time to engagement." 5 hours. He nodded. "Good. Let them come." Light years away, aboard the Dominion flagship Vorthan, Supreme Admiral Zalti reclined in his command chair, watching the slow crawl of their armada toward Earth. The war was a formality, a display of dominance. Humanity had no counter to their fleet. No counter to their firepower. In a matter of hours, the campaign would be over, and Earth would kneel. And yet, something gnawed at him. He had studied countless species. He had crushed dozens of rebellions. And in all his years, he had never seen a species declare war against the Dominion. Why? The humans had no allies. No superior weapons. No hidden fleets. Their numbers were pitiful compared to the Dominion's vast empire. So why weren't they afraid? "Sir," one of his officers interrupted his thoughts. "We've intercepted their transmissions." "Play it." The recording crackled to life. It was a live feed from Earth's military headquarters. General Mercer stood before his officers, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "We've studied their tactics," he said. "We know their weaknesses. And most importantly, we know how they think." Zalti narrowed his eyes. "They believe this will be a battle," Mercer continued. "But it won't be." The general's expression was unreadable. Cold. Certain. "This is an execution." The transmission cut. For the first time in his long career, Zalti felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The Dominion fleet moved with precision, gliding through the void like an unstoppable force. Their formation was flawless, their confidence absolute. This was not war to them, it was procedure. A simple, calculated extermination. Earth did not respond. No desperate transmissions. No last-minute surrenders. Just silence. Zalti observed the data scrolling across his tactical display. Human defenses were minimal. A handful of orbital platforms. A few scattered fleets that didn't even attempt to intercept. The Dominion had fought civilizations that spanned thousands of star systems, and none had ever fallen this easily. It felt wrong. Status on Earth's defenses? Zaltiyuar asked. His tactical officer hesitated. Minimal resistance detected. No energy spikes, no planetary shields. A species facing annihilation, and they weren't even trying? Zaltiyuar's mandibles clicked in thought. They're planning something. Another officer scoffed. What could they possibly? An alert blared across the command deck. The lights flickered. A surge of foreign code flooded their systems. Sir, something is. The Dominion fleet's central AI flickered. A system once considered impenetrable. It lasted 4 seconds against human cyber warfare before it collapsed. Screens blacked out. Targeting arrays failed. Navigation systems shut down. Panic spread through the fleet as ships veered off course, colliding with one another. Thrusters misfired. Shields deactivated. Weapons powered down. A voice crackled through their failing comms. You rely too much on automation. Mercer's voice. Calm. Unshaken. Zaltiyuar's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. This wasn't possible. The Dominion had perfected warfare. Their systems were designed to be flawless. Yet here they were, paralyzed before the first shot was even fired. Reboot the network. Purge the intrusion. Sir, it's rewriting our core protocols faster than we can. The officer's words died as a Dominion battleship turned its weapons on its own fleet. Then another. And another. Zaltiyuar watched, horrified, as his own ships began firing at each other. Human cyber warfare had not just disabled their systems, it had rewired their fleets to attack their own forces. They've hijacked our targeting matrices, the officer choked out. We can't stop it. It was then Zaltiyuar understood. The humans had never planned to match them ship for ship. They had never needed to. They had already won. Mercer stood with his hands behind his back, watching the Dominion fleet tear itself apart. His officers worked with mechanical efficiency, executing the next phase of the operation. The first step had been disarming the enemy. The second was finishing them. All units, begin engagement. Earth's fleet moved in perfect synchronicity, slipping through the gaps of the Dominion's fractured armada. The humans did not fight with brute force. They fought with precision. Every strike calculated, every maneuver executed flawlessly. Dominion ships, unable to coordinate, fell in droves. Their superior firepower meant nothing when they had no control. Aboard his failing flagship, Zaltiyuar's composure cracked. This isn't possible, he muttered. This isn't how war is fought. He had expected orbital bombardments. Suicidal last stands. Desperation. But what he saw instead was surgical annihilation. The humans were not fighting. They were erasing them. Zaltiyuar's personal guards turned as he stood. Prepare my escape vessel. We need to. An explosion rocked the ship. His officers were already dead. The bridge was falling apart. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw it, a human ship, gliding through the wreckage, its weapons locked on him. A final message played across his failing monitors. This war was over before it began. And then everything went dark. The Dominion fleet was in ruins. What had begun as a show of force had turned into a massacre. Battleships, once symbols of galactic supremacy, drifted lifelessly, their hulls breached, their crews either dead or surrendering. Human forces moved methodically, eliminating what little resistance remained. There was no desperation in their attacks, no reckless charges, only precision. Every engagement was calculated, every shot purposeful. They weren't fighting a war. They were ending one. Mercer watched the operation unfold in silence. He had given the order 5 hours ago. Now, it was nearly complete. Status: 73% of the Dominion fleet is destroyed or disabled, an officer reported. Survivors are broadcasting surrender signals. The remaining ships are attempting retreat. Attempting? Yes, sir. They can't jump. Of course they couldn't. Humanity's quantum interdiction waves were already active, locking down all faster-than-light travel in the system. The Dominion had never needed to account for such a weapon. No species had ever challenged their ability to retreat before. Now, they were trapped. A transmission came through. Fragmented, desperate. The Dominion fleet's remaining officers begging for mercy. They had never known defeat on this scale. Never imagined that they, the most dominant empire in the galaxy, could be hunted. Orders, sir? Mercer considered the question. Most commanders would have dragged this out, demanded reparations, made an example of their enemies. But this wasn't about pride. It was about efficiency. Accept their surrender, he said. Disable any ship that resists. He turned to the holomap, now littered with wreckage and drifting debris. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted 4 hours and 47 minutes. It was over. Across the system, Dominion officers abandoned their ships, scrambling for escape pods. They no longer cared about victory. They only wanted to live. But even survival was not guaranteed. The moment the Dominion's surrender was confirmed, the next phase of the operation began. Without a word, human fleets split off into multiple strike groups, each with a single objective: cut off the head of the snake. On the Dominion homeworld, Emperor Valter stood frozen before the massive war map that displayed his empire's vast dominion. A map that, just hours ago, had shown the unquestioned power of his people. Now, it was filled with distress signals. Entire sectors had gone dark. His military council had stopped responding. The fleets that had once upheld his rule had either been obliterated or had turned against him, infected by human cyber warfare, their AI-controlled ships rewriting their loyalties in real time. A single incoming transmission played through the palace speakers. The voice was clear. Controlled. Surrender. Now. Valter's hands clenched into fists. He had ruled for centuries. Had crushed dozens of rebellions, had bent countless species to his will. He would not. The lights flickered. The floor beneath him trembled. The humans were already here. Valter turned just as the palace doors were blasted open. Armed figures stepped through the smoke. Human soldiers. They hadn't just come for his fleets. They had come for him. Valter sat motionless, his hands trembling as he watched his empire crumble in real time. Every attempt to contact his war council was met with silence. The Dominion fleet, once the pride of his people, was gone. Not just defeated, dismantled. His guards stood at the ready, their weapons trained on the breach in the palace doors. But even they knew the truth. The battle had ended before it began. The sound of boots echoed through the throne room. Human soldiers advanced with mechanical precision, weapons raised but unnecessary. No one resisted. The war was already over. A single figure stepped forward. General Mercer. His expression was unreadable, his presence absolute. He did not gloat. He did not offer threats. He simply stared at the fallen emperor, waiting. Valter's throat tightened. You planned this. Mercer gave the faintest nod. Yes. The realization hit like a physical blow. Humanity had never been outmatched. They had never been desperate. They had been waiting, studying, preparing for the moment the Dominion overstepped. And when that moment came, they did not fight a war. They ended one. Valter exhaled, his pride crumbling. What happens now? Mercer stepped forward, placing a small data pad on the throne beside him. A treaty. Not a negotiation, an ultimatum. You will sign, Mercer said. Your empire will dissolve. Your fleets will be absorbed. Your people will answer to us. Valter's hands shook as he picked up the data pad. The Dominion had ruled for millennia. Had crushed countless civilizations. And now, in less than 5 hours, it was gone. There was no other choice. He pressed his thumb against the pad. The agreement was sealed. Mercer nodded once. Wise decision. Valter forced himself to meet the general's gaze. Was this always the plan? Mercer held his stare for a long moment, then gave the smallest smirk. It was over before it began. And with that, the war ended.